You're listening to the Insight to Action podcast. My name is Donna Jones, and I'm your host. My work is also involves bringing a different way of seeing things and merging that with awareness-based decision-making so that breakthroughs can take place, particularly at the leading level. It's exciting because right now we're watching around the world companies exploring more and more participatory and collaborative forms of governance. Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations, gave everyone a lexicon of color coding, so now people talk about teal and green and orange, and so that's nice. Not everyone fully accepted that, certainly not in North America, but at least it gave the organizational community a way to see where we were, where am I on this map. Still, there's been a lot of skepticism about whether open participatory forms of governance would work in the public sector. In episode 22 with Katrin Muff, we talked about the Implementing Holacracy in Business School, Lausanne. Today, I'm talking to Laurent Ledoux, who's going to help us answer the question, can open participatory forms of governance work in the public sector? Now, let's get started by chatting about what did you do with the public sector and how did the whole participatory governance field become a passion for you?
Well, the field itself started very early, but I did not really realize it. I started to realize that I was really interested into this when I took over the management of a business unit within a large international bank. And it felt like I had to give more autonomy to the people I was working with. I needed to trust them in order to basically turn the business unit around and make it more a better place to work, and also with a higher performance. And it worked really well. And a few years later, while I was still, transforming the business unit, I met Laurent Ledoux, who was just drafting his book. And we talked about it. So he gave me his manuscript, and I was lucky enough to basically read it and make some comments based on my own experience. It was great because I realized then that I was not alone to try to do those things, although I did not even know it would be called participatory governance. A few months later, I was also lucky enough to invite Isaac Getz to give a lecture for a seminar I was organizing. Every month I organize seminars of philosophy for managers, and there again, I realized that what Isaac was saying was pretty close to what I was doing without being able to name it liberation or reinvention. So basically there, I really became really hooked on liberation, reinvention, and so on. And ever since, I've dedicated myself to it. And that's how, after about 6 years in the banking sector, I had the luck to be appointed president of the Ministry of Transport in Belgium. So basically, Director General for Transport. And of course, based on my experience within the bank, I decided I would also try to do the same within the public sector. And basically, it was a great adventure, which worked pretty well, in fact.
We have to dig deeper in this one because you've been walking into the two areas that are deemed the most challenging in terms of redesigning and rethinking governance. One of them being the financial sector, and the other one being the public sector. So tell us more.
Okay.
What happened? What did you do? What did you see happen? What were the pushbacks or the challenges that you faced, and how did you deal with them?
All right. So first of all, I would like to say that there is no method. There is no standard methodology. Anybody who would tell you that, I don't think he's talking right. What you need to do first is really to start to talk with people. Talk with people, try to understand what's going on, what's going less well within the organization, get a feeling for the organization. And then basically you need to start to act in ways which give people trust, which make them feel included, which make them feel respected, which make them feel that you want them to grow as a person instead of just as a professional. And so, through those acts, you start to create a different culture around you. And more and more, then people will start to ask questions. Why are you doing this differently? And then you can start building a team around you that will be able to make those very simple principles alive within the organization. So, in a nutshell, what I do is to try to make sure that the very basic psychological needs of all humans are respected. I don't know if you know the self-determination theory of DC and Ryan, but basically the idea is that those basic psychological needs are autonomy, affiliation, and competence, or the feeling that you are growing as a person. So once again, the only thing I do is basically trying to make sure that those three principles are alive within the organization I am in. And I make sure that every gesture, every thought is geared towards this. And if you do it on a continuous basis, then people also start to try to do the same. And there is, I don't know, some kind of energy which starts to circulate, which makes it authentic and attractive to a growing number of people within the organization. So that's, in a nutshell, what I try to do. Now, I know it may seem or sound fluffy, and to some extent it is, because I could not tell you, in a systematic way what I do. Again, the only thing I really do is to try to live my job as a manager within an organization according to those principles. But more specifically, let's try what I've implemented either in the bank or in the public sector or even in other companies in order to make those three principles live within an organization. When we talk about affiliation, for me, it's showing respect to all people within the organization and to involve them in basically in all decisions whenever possible. So what does that mean? Is to first create what Ricardo Semler calls a why-way culture. A culture in which people feel that they can ask any question, even the most disturbing ones, even the most, annoying one for the management, and make them feel that any question is good and that they deserve to get an answer. That's one thing. And how do you achieve to make this culture felt like this? Well, one of the ways, for example, to allow everybody to participate in the design of the strategy of the organization. It is also, for example, to open the executive committee of the organization. So, for example, what we did at the ministry at first was to communicate the agenda of the executive committee before the meeting and after with the decisions we had taken. That was a first small revolution. Secondly, we asked people to tell us which points should we take on the agenda of the executive committee. And then in the third phase, we invited anybody who wanted to participate to the management committee. And this led to, of course, to a different dynamic within the committee, which became much more concerned with the daily problems of the collaborators. And it became also more strategic because we were more conscious of the real issues people were facing on a daily basis. That's one of the things we did. Another thing we did in order to include more people was to adopt sociocratic principles in our meetings. Of course, basically, elections without candidates, the use of little bells in order to stop people talking too much out of their ego, things like that. Basically trying to adopt all those practices of sociocracy. What we did also was to make sure, in order to make people feel included, to be as humble and as possible with our people. So, meaning, always being at the disposal of anybody within the company, not showing any difference in respect according to the level within the organization, according to the hierarchical level or whatever. For example, what we did, we moved to an open desk policy, flex desk policy, so landscapes and so on. But what is very important is that we made sure that everybody would adopt it. So including myself as president or the other director generals, we would not have any office anymore. It's very important to make sure when you move in doing something like this that everybody does it. So you respect the intrinsic equality of all people within the organization. In the bank, we had another issue, for example, was the discrepancy between the salaries of people doing the same job, because they came from different banks which had been merged, and so they had a different history and therefore different salaries. We knew that HR would not allow for an upgrade or a leveling off of those salaries. So basically what we decided together, collectively, is that we would use part of the yearly bonus for the team to correct, basically, the imbalances between the salaries of the different people. This was another way to show that we wanted to be just and fair with everybody. And I think that the combination of all those ways of doing things led people to feel respected and included. So that's one. And those are just examples. I do not claim that any of what I told you is essential by itself. They are just, expressions of this principle, but it could be expressed in different ways in other organizations. Now, the second one, the growth principle, or what we did basically is to take over the idea of the sweet spot within Gore. You know what the sweet spot is? Well, basically, it's the meeting point between the capacities of the person, the pertinence of the activities he or she is performing, and the pleasure he or she has in doing them. And basically, the idea is that HR's main task should be to help people to find their sweet spot within the organization. Okay? You might not always get it right, at first or directly, but there is a commitment from everybody within the organization to help the others, including themselves, to find their sweet spot. I think that's essential. Another way to do this, or to allow for people to find their sweet spot, is to allow them to explore much more. For example, I had commercial people at the bank who were supposed to visit potential clients. We had, for example, hospitals as our clients. But I told them, don't just visit the CEOs or the CFOs of hospitals. Try also to visit doctors, patients, whatever. I mean, to try to understand what's going on within those hospitals. What do they need? And just broaden their horizons, you see? That's one thing. And in the same way, we also suppressed the fixed list of trainings within the bank or within the ministry. We said, basically, tell us the type of things you would like to be trained in. And it might be different for everybody. It's okay. We'll see if we have the budget, if we can allow for it, but we do our best to develop new skills. What we did also was to quite drastically review the way we gave feedback and evaluation. Less formal feedback and more regular, descriptive, positive, informal feedback to people. Making sure that the various managers understood the need for feedbacks, were giving it, were also receiving it in a 360-degree fashion, and so on. So all this, I guess, gave the feeling to people that, yeah, they were not just, trained to become better professional, but also to become a better person. And then the last one, autonomy or self-direction or self-management, whatever we want to call it. Well, first of all, you need to define the boundaries in which autonomy will be exercised. I think it's very important because there is no liberty without boundaries. I take the image of a fish bowl. If you want to free the fish, you won't basically, break down the bowl, because then what happens is that the water will spill, and in the end the fish will die suffocating because there is no water anymore, because there is no bowl anymore. So what you need to do is to expand the bowl and to define broader boundaries in which people have more autonomy, but they still need those collectively agreed boundaries, which give them also some sense of community, some sense of purpose, some sense of security also even. So that's something we did, and we allowed teams to do so at their level. We also, within the public sector, we did what was not common at the time, was to suppress the clocking in and clocking out. But in fact, we did not suppress it. We suppressed the obligation to clock in or clock out. And the difference is important because this allowed us, first, not to have trouble with unions, but also it gave the feeling to people, we are not, pushing for something they don't like. We give them the choice. Either you get out of the system and you may later be able to get back in, clocking in and clocking out if you want, but you choose. The only thing we ask you, if you stop clocking in and clocking out, is to define clearly, together with your team members, your objectives, the objectives you want to commonly pursue, so that everybody agrees on what needs to be done, and irrespective where you will be working from, you will be working with them on those objectives. And likewise, we facilitated teleworking, so home working, up to 3 days a week, which was also uncommon within the public sector. In order to facilitate all this, we also moved into cloud computing, and it was also a first, at least in Belgium, for a ministry. So basically, people started to feel that we were treating them as adults. And when you treat people as infants, they behave as infants. If you treat them with trust as adults, they will be wanting and willing to be worthy of that trust. Of course, there will be always a few guys trying to abuse that trust. But then, frankly, my analysis is very simple. First of all, the costs associated with those people abusing the system are much lower than the costs associated with the frustration of the rest, because you treat them as infants and you don't stop controlling them. Secondly, when you have that type of trust among most of your employees, the team will take care of the people who are not trustworthy anymore. And they will do it sometimes in a harsh way, but a just way. They will say, look, before it was okay, you abused the boss, but today you abuse us because we are a team. And if you don't do your share, then we have to do more just because of you. So either you do your share or you get out, basically. And what is nice also about all this is that you see that sometimes people cannot do their share for good reasons. I don't know, they have a sick wife, or they have a sick man, or sick children, or for whatever reason they've trouble at home, and the rest of the team may cover that person for a while. But when they feel that it's not, earnest, then they will also take care of it. So basically, when you do all this, people want to take initiatives, feel they have the capacity to do so, and feel they have the liberty to do so also. And incredible things start to emerge. So, on one hand, impossible to describe exactly what happens and what needs to be done. There is no clear path, but I would say that the path is just to be guided by those very simple principles where you respect people, you make them feel included, you give them the autonomy they need within the boundaries that are necessary and collectively defined, and you make them grow. You allow them to grow as a person. That's it.
It's beautiful and simple in its humanity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is great, and I only discovered this very recently, it is that it's scientifically validated. Those basic psychological needs, you can find them in all human beings, everywhere, in all cultures, whatever their age. So, all that talk about millennials who would have different needs and so on than older people, I think that's just bullshit. What happens is that maybe the way they will fulfill those needs might be different. But fundamentally, just like plants which need water, sun, and good earth, well, people need affiliation, inclusion, they need autonomy, and they need to feel they can grow. And if you give them that, they will blossom, and your company or your organization will function. And in that sense, people from the public sector are not different from the private sector. So basically, you can do the same, which doesn't mean that it will work exactly the same. But those psychological needs people need are the same everywhere.
Wonderful. Now, I am curious because, I'm curious about a whole bunch of things, but one of them is decision making. Did you distribute the decision making?
Okay, so it's a difficult one because especially within the public sector, you have a lot of rigidities with that. Before answering fully your question, let me tell you this. There are obvious rigidities within the public sector which make it sometimes more difficult to implement participatory governance than in the private sector. Having said this, what matters is not so much what you do, but the spirit in which you do it. And people will understand that there are constraints within the public sector, and as long as they understand those constraints, they will be okay with it. So basically, our participatory governance was less, let's say, profound in a way within the public sector than in the private one. For example, because the hierarchy within the public sector, I was not able to change. For example, in other organizations, we are working on different ways to basically decide on the remuneration of people. That you can do in the private sector. If the team has a high enough maturity to discuss this openly and to review the way you decide, okay, do we, let's say, allow us for a bonus, an individual one or a group one, or no bonus at all, or whatever, you can do that. In the public sector, so far, you cannot change that. So that's okay. You live with it. And you try to apply the principles I mentioned earlier in different ways. That's all. So was I really able to distribute power and authority? Yes, up to a point. There were many things which I delegated or which I stopped to decide. For example, just to give you a small example, I was supposed to sign every travel request for any member of the Ministry of Transport. So every day I got at least 10 or 20 requests to be signed. Obviously, I was not in a position to know whether those travels were justified or not. So I said, basically, I don't sign them anymore. You organize this at the level of your teams. We trust you. If at some point some people abuse it, that's okay. We'll take measures then. but so far we don't need to. So you see, those little things we were able to delegate, but then for other things it was just not possible because the law said I had to sign it, and it would have taken me years to change that.
Absolutely. There's always those legislative requirements that you have to meet or whatever they're, yeah.
But it's not so important. There are so many other things you can do in order to make those principles alive within the organization.
Fantastic explanation of what the process is about. And I know we could easily go for an hour, but we don't have an hour. We've got a couple more minutes here. I want to dive into what you're doing now because you've done an incredible bit of work in the public sector with participatory governance, and now you're a consultant.
Well, yes, I'm a consultant. Let's say I accompany companies who want to transform themselves in the way of Ledoux and Getz and so on. But I also act as a crisis manager, which means that on behalf of the board, I take over the management of a company which is ailing. The difference with traditional crisis manager is that we do it in a participatory way. So basically, the first thing we do is to assemble the team or the members of the company, or we visit them on their sites, and basically we share with them the financial situation of the company, which is sometimes not done by other crisis managers. So we say, this is the situation, this is how it is, we will need to take difficult measures, we want to take them with you. We want first to try to see what can be done in order to save the organization. If we need to make some cuts, we will do them, but together with you, and we'll try to see where they should be done. And it works. It works. It's incredible.
You've done a few of them now.
Well, I've done one completely, and we were quite successful. Now I'm starting another one, but the people I'm working with on this have done already 120 of those operations. And I think that so far they've been more than 110, let's say, have been fully successful. Applying those basic principles of trust and the principles I mentioned earlier. Even in crisis situations.
Any tips you want to share with the audience on how to move forward with participatory governance?
There is only one tip. It's to start to work upon yourself.
I love that. That is the source.
That's the source, because it all starts there. When I started the ministry, I had this crazy dream that I would help transform the organization just by being there, by doing nothing else than just be there and try to share a positive energy. Of course, I didn't stop working and doing things, but the idea is that what will really matter in the transformation is not so much what you do, but what you are and what you try to convey by the way you are. And if every manager tried to do this, then fantastic things happen. Because basically what it leads to is that you move from a high posture to a lower posture. A high posture is one where you feel like you are dominant and you control the others as a manager, and the lower one is where you are at their service. Basically, we find the ideas of servant leadership and so on, which to me are very much connected to the idea of liberation and transformation. Actually, when people ask me, you talk about liberation of the organization, but liberation from what? I have a very simple answer. Liberation from the ego of managers.
Well, I can't top that. That's incredibly astute and profound at the same time. Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Is there a place you'd like to send people for more information on your work?
Well, the website of Philosophy and Management, which is www.philoma, philoma.org. Unfortunately, most of it is in French so far, but you will find also some English documents, podcasts, and so on.
I'm happy. There's a gentleman who's just taken up Spark the Change in Paris, and I'll make sure that he knows about this podcast. We've just connected, okay. So that would be next, which is exciting because Spark the Change started in London, then it went to Toronto, Montreal, and now I see Paris has picked it up, and I think there's one going on in Australia as well. So, but at any rate, I have to give a big shout out of gratitude to Isaac Getz for referring me to you and doing the introductions. I have a program with Isaac elsewhere on the podcast, so you can listeners can listen to that. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you and with your listeners.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think we could go on for quite a period of time. Lots to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna.
Head over to episode 25 to listen to Isaac Getz's conversation on liberating organizations. You've heard us talk about that in this podcast quite a bit, in this episode quite a bit. Other than that, I'd appreciate you sharing this and distributing it to people that you think might be ready for the conversation around participatory governance. I get excited about principles, I get excited about ethics, and I get excited about decision making and leadership and blend those all together, and that's why we had this topic today. So I hope you enjoyed it and would appreciate your support. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, DAWNA Jones, or you can also find me on Twitter at EPDAWNA_Jones, and or on Facebook at From Insight to Action. Thanks again for your support, and I hope you enjoyed the show.